anyway, I'm glad to be with you, and all is well. All is well with the world. We had, it's amazing because Raymond and I had a lovely time. Did you tell them? You ought to tell them a little bit about our road trip to Covington, Louisiana. We lost our dear friend, brother Edgar Schaefer. He was a covenant brother of mine, and Raymond and I miss him severely. What's that?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Please, yeah.
Who knows Edgar and wants a copy of the order of service and his obituary? I have some up front. Feel free to take one.
Yeah.
You know, like guys like Michael who went up to Pigeon Forge.
You remember, yeah. Yeah, we had the Three Musketeers or the Three Stooges, depending on what you call it there. And the three of us, Raymond and Edgar and I, would go on various trips together. At least 3 in New Orleans, maybe 4, several in Atlanta. In fact, we were scheduled to go this very week. He had his flights ready to go up, and we were going to go to Gibbs Gardens, is one of the things we like to do, and look at beauty together because we have such an appreciation, and we share that together. I had such an extraordinary experience with Edgar a number of years ago, and I won't go into the details, but we kind of like had a connecting experience where all of a sudden his pain came into mind as I was hugging him after I spoke at Windy Gap, and his went into mine, and I've never seen anything like that before. And people were leaving, and so everybody was giving a hug to each other and going away. But when I did it with Edgar, we couldn't let go. The strangest, I've never had that happen before. We couldn't let go. And suddenly I began to feel his pain. And he mine. And we were weeping. And it must have been 3, maybe 5 minutes. I never had that happen before. Have you ever heard of such a thing? It was an exchange in which we bore each other's burdens, literally. And it was a binding connection. It was a melding of souls, which was so profound. So you can well imagine how much I miss him. Yeah, but a funeral for a believer is a bittersweet event. It's a tragedy for those who are still here, but the best is now is being enjoyed by the one who's in the presence of Jesus. So I had an opportunity to speak because in his instructions about his funeral, he actually left instructions, and he specifically asked, if he's available, I'd like Ken Boa to present the gospel at my memorial service. So I told him, he asked me to do it. You're blaming this on him. But you had 300 people there, and it was a great gospel opportunity, as you can imagine. So it goes from there. And it had a case of Jesus in his own words right here. And I told them, some of you don't know him and don't believe in these things. That's understandable. But you do owe it to yourself to out of intellectual honesty. You owe it to yourself to make an informed decision based not on second and third hand information, as most people have of Jesus, but hearing his primary words. You do that Gospel of John, but Jesus in his own words really guides you through the process. So you can, because I said agnosticism's not an option. It's not. You may think it's a virtue. It's not. When someone offers his life for you and you choose to ignore the gift, it's tantamount to rejection. So I said this puts us in a place of vulnerability, as Archie has put it. The coffin is a better evangelist than the cradle. It guides, and it forces us to begin to ask the fundamental questions. Where did I come from? Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? And then I said, there's another group of you. And I was saying that the other group are people who have religion. They believe in Jesus, but they have no relationship. A religion without Christ. And they can recite the creeds and so forth, because they haven't grasped the difference between intellectual belief and personal reception. The moment of transfer of trust, whereby you actually you entrust yourself to him and receive. You transfer your trust really from yourself to Jesus and receive that gift. So in that book, there's a prayer at the end where you can invite Jesus in your life. So I prayed it right in the middle of my talk. And I believe some people followed me in that prayer. And then after that prayer, I then said, now, for those who know him, here's what it's like. And then I used my 2 womb idea that I've shared with you on several occasions. The idea that you were once in an earlier womb that you don't remember called womb world, and it was a very small thing, but you couldn't stay there. You were never meant to stay there. To stay beyond term would be to die. But you can't be in two worlds at once, so you had to die to womb world to be birthed into this larger womb. But it is a larger womb, because womb world was designed to prepare us for bios, our biological life. This world is a larger womb. It's for soulish, for spiritual life, for Zoe. Instead of bios, it's Zoe, the second birth. Everyone's got the bios, but nobody is born with the Zoe. That's a choice. That's a process where we have to receive that relationship, that gift. And so I then was talking about how there's so many things in this world that are far beyond the imagination of a person who was in womb world. And you said, if you went out of here, they'd say no. But actually, we see and do things that you could never dream of in womb world. But you were never meant to stay in this womb either. Instead of 9 months, you might get 9 decades. But at the end of the day, it's another womb, and it's a soul-forming womb. And then I said that what we call death for the believer is the second birth canal. And so it's a nice way to end that, you see. It's a lovely way to do it. I always use that whenever I do a sermon, or at a funeral, rather. Well, that's enough on that. But I've been processing this, and grief comes in waves, as you know. But we grieve, but not as those who have no hope, because the grief is ours, not his. And that's the beauty. That's the payoff. Let me see. Let's go and. You want the far side, but I'm running late here. I'm gonna, I'm thinking about. I tell you what. Instead of far side, just give me this. I'm going to show you one poignant and beautiful nature photograph. No, you'll like it. It's a touching bird of a bird feeding its young, and so yes, it's a mother wrench feeding her young. Just very poignant, and you swear that's an eye in that thing. It's actually absolutely brilliant. Who comes up with these crazy things? That's my substitute for the far side. In fact, I'll hold it up because you want to take a photo of it. You got your phone. So don't be too disappointed. That didn't take very long, did it? Yeah. We're going to be talking about the book of Ecclesiastes today and then 2 weeks from now. This is from my book, the Handbook to Scripture. And Handbook to Scripture is the basis for the emails. I hope you're getting Daily Growth. If not, go to kenbo.org, sign up for Daily Growth. It's a shot in the arm, and it guides you through the Scriptures. You don't have to even wonder what to read, and it guides you through the process of doing that. But in Daily Growth, or in this book, I have 365 key chapters of the Bible. The two I chose from Ecclesiastes, because you see it was Proverbs 9 and then Proverbs 31, which we've completed the Proverbs last 2 times ago. Well, these are the two from Ecclesiastes, and I only had 2, because you have over 900 chapters, so you have to be selective in what you choose. But I chose chapters 3 and 12, and I talk about the need for satisfaction and significance in life, which drives most people to pursue these things, but they go to the wrong places, don't they? They go to the created order instead of the creator of order. And there's a big difference between the created order and the creator of order. And so it's a roadmap, because you see, again, this idea of going to the wrong places is very evident. When you look, I've shown you this many times, but it's worth reviewing. Men are driven for these 3 things in different degrees. Some want more than another, but at the end of the day, we all have a need for all 3, because it's God-given, for security, to have a security of love and acceptance, for significance, that your life will last, that it's going to endure, and for satisfaction, that you can accomplish something. But we turn generally to people, to possessions, and to position to gain these 3, and they never satisfy, because people will let us down, we'll let them down. So you'll not have security in people if that's the end of the day. The same is true, as we well know, with possessions, and certainly true even with position and performance. Never enough. So the biblical answer to that is here's the three places where you find those three in the triune Godhead. So in security, you'll find security from the Father who loved you enough to adopt you into his household, and you can't adopt someone by accident. Where'd you come from? You see? Where'd that kid come from? Well, you adopted him. You see? So adoption's a choice that you were meant to be. And so the fundamental question of meaning is, where did I come from? And he adopted you into his family and gave you a dignity of being a member of his household. So that's security, because he loved you, and not because of something that we did to earn it, but because he chose to love us, because we are bearers of his image, like a father would in his son. And so significance has to do with the matter of being in something bigger than ourselves, and we are members of the body of Christ, and Christ is the head of that body. So you're part of something bigger than you are. And the need for satisfaction, that the Holy Spirit then provides us with the capacity to accomplish something that's going to last forever. That's satisfaction. To accomplish something that you know is going to have some kind of reverberation into eternity is a lovely thought, isn't it? Because you and I want to do something. Because if it's only here, an episode between the two oblivions, a little blink in the cosmic time, what was that about? Nothing. But if what you do reverberates and matters and affects other people in eternal beings, that's significant and that's satisfying. And so to reveal that is a great grace. So as I go on to say, this is a roadmap, this book, Ecclesiastes, and it shows us where the human quest apart from God ends up. And it's always this mindset of realizing that there's got to be something more than this world. It's a warning by a person who had it all, that the world will never satisfy our deepest longings, since these can only be satisfied in a relationship with the living God. And the key verse there is in our chapter, Ecclesiastes 3:11, which says, he has set eternity in our heart. And so you're God-haunted. Even the atheist is God-haunted because he's a bearer of the Imago Dei. He cannot help it. It's a reminder to him all the time. And so what we have then is this is an image from my book Leverage, but it's the same principle. A lever is a simple machine that increases efficiency by amplifying a small force and turning it into a much larger one. It opens up a realm of mechanical possibilities. So the Greek mathematician Archimedes famously said, give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, I shall move the world. What is he saying? You actually, if the lever were long enough, you could lift the world because of the multiplication of force, but you couldn't be on the world to do it, could you? That's why it's called an Archimedean reference point. It means it's not on the world or under the world. Unlike Jack Kerouac's On the Road, we can't be on the road. You have to be above the road to see it. You can't be under the sun. It has to be above the sun. Do you get the idea? Because he's constantly using this imagery, all this life under the sun, under the sun. And what he's providing here in this book is an astonishing philosophy. It's the most, quote, modern of the books of the Bible because it speaks with relevance and power to our own age. But because you're talking about something that affects everything, that affects our lives and so forth. And so it's a relevant book, and it matters, it deals with matters of infinite importance because we long to do that. So the question is, you have to be above the sun to see this eternal perspective. Under the sun, reason is not enough. You can't answer those four. What are the four questions I gave you before? The question of meaning. What was it? Just as a reminder, I'm just going to go. I have my four questions here. Okay, I'll do it this way. Yes, this is it. So the meaning, identity, purpose, and hope, there they are. So as I said at Edgar's memorial service, the fundamental question you're forced now to ask is, where did I come from? You see, in a funeral, you're more vulnerable because suddenly you have a glimpse into reality. Whether you like it or not, you come to realize that what George Bernard Shaw once said was very true. The statistics are impressive. 1 out of 1 dies. It's not a question of if, it's only a question of when. And it'll be generally sooner than you think. So where did I come from has a bearing that we have to ask, but most people have an incredible capacity to avoid and avert these questions. As Pascal said, it was indifference and distraction. 300 years earlier, he spoke about how we would have a strategy to avoid the ultimate questions. Indifference and distraction. And distraction is more profound. Industries of distraction that are dopamine-based, that are basically addictive machines that distract people from asking really meaningful questions. Meaning, the question of where did I come from? Identity, the question of who am I? Who gets to define you? And there's only two sources, either the world around you, and then you'll have no security, or what's the other option? The Word, God's Word. And he gives you a different definition than you would have made for yourself in the world. So you have to choose who defines me. Is it the world or the Word? Remember my phrase? The world will define you how? By default. The Word will only define you by discipline. I'm training you. You're going to know this stuff. But you see, you have to choose to allow the Word to define you. And even then, you can slip back into the old performance-based notions that we pick up from the world if you're not careful. So the question of identity. And then third, the question of purpose. Why am I here? And the fourth question we should be asking is, where am I going? For a person not to ask those questions and wrestle with them, and people have developed a singular capacity to avoid thinking about these even for decades. It astonishes me how they can do it. We ought to be thinking about these four questions every day because they relate to the whole gospel story, and we recognize that that's absolutely essential. So going back to this concept of the Archimedean reference point, then we need something more than reason, because reason will only get us so far. There's a second form of knowledge, and it's empiricism. So with the evidence from the deductive reasoning, using your mind that you've been given in the image of God, but also, and that's an instrument of truth. But you also have another instrument of truth, and that's empiricism. So you can use your sensory capacities and draw conclusions from that. That's induction, and that's really empiricism, and that's what science is based upon, empirically based knowledge. You induce it, and rather than deduce it. Actually, the best approach, there's a third that combines the best approach to both, and it's called abduction. Abduction is inference to the best explanation, and that's what best science does. But in any case, you and I have to recognize that we need an eternal reference point that's beyond our scope to understand these things. And so I want to just say a few words about Ecclesiastes and kind of draw you into some things, and then say a few words about Ecclesiastes 1 to 3. Let me have your phone. I need a phone so I can have a clock, because when I have my little thing up here, I can't use my phone. That's all I need. Yeah, I don't want to. Yeah, 7:30. Good. Okay, I'll do my best. We'll have a little bit of time. Introduction and title, though, is you're looking at a book that is whose key word is vanity, haval. So when he says haval, havalim, vanity of vanities. And it's a hard word to translate, but it has to do with something as futile, evanescent, like a soap bubble. It doesn't last. You can't cling to it. You know what I'm saying. It's something that you see for a brief moment and it's gone. And it's the futile emptiness of trying to be happy apart from God. The preacher immediately takes, traditionally, Solomon, I'll explain that why. He was the wealthiest, he was the most influential king in all history. And he basically says, if he says this man had more resources than any other person that ever lived to draw these conclusions, it wasn't speaking out of sour grapes. He had money, sex, and power in spades. So much and so, in fact, that if a little was good, more was better, and too much was just right. Everything was too much with Solomon. And so you have this life under him. He concluded from all these things that it doesn't add up. It's power, popularity, prestige, pleasure. None of these things satisfy. And so he was one who experimented and tried to see this. And from God's perspective, that Archimedean reference point I was just referring to there, the Archimedean of off the world, You have to be off the world to understand what's on the world. And you can't do that unless you have something that's a third way of knowing. What are the three ways of knowing? What did I tell you they were? It was reason, and then there was empiricism, and the third way of knowing is revelation. These two are naturally given to us, but they'll only carry you so far. Unless you have a third way of knowing, revelation, you'll never be able to answer these questions. So revelation is a gift from God. And my basic philosophy of life is really kind of was summarized in the title of one of Francis Schaeffer's books. He is there and he's not silent. So the God who is there, he's picking up from that. I remember when that came out in 1968, when I became a believer in June of '67. Found myself at Dallas Seminary in January of '68, and then finally began to get exposed to C.S. Lewis. Never heard of him before that time. And Francis Schaeffer's first books came out, and he dealt with escape from reason and the God who is there. And then later on talked about how he is there and he's not silent. Which this is my philosophy. God, there is one who is transcendent and eternal, who always is, and he is always there. But at the same time, he's revealed himself decisively to us. He's chosen to reveal what otherwise could not be known. So he's not silent. So my basic philosophy is that God has revealed himself. He's there, and the eternal one who's spoken the worlds into being, the Logos, now has become one with us and has communicated this love message to us, a love letter, an incredible concept to us. So this is a divine perspective that gives us meaning and purpose, you see, because he recognized as well, if you bring God into the occasion, skepticism and despair can melt away if I look at life as a daily gift from God. But it's mixed signals the book provides, as you'll see, because he's wrestling. What would it be like? What would be the best wisdom could come up with drawing it, deducing it, and inducing it from this world? This is about the best philosophy you could come up with. But it's limited. But then often he'll go beyond that and say, but there is more. There is a God. And life does matter, especially in chapter 12. At the end of the matter is to fear God and keep his commandments. But it's the best philosophy can do without God. His name, the Hebrew title of the book, in fact, is Koheleth. And this term is found only in this book, this Hebrew term, rare term. And it consists from the word kahal, which means to invoke an assembly, or so it really means one who addresses an assembly or a preacher. So it's the preacher is what we're talking about, but not this is the ordinary preacher, as you'll see. The Septuagint, which was the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible that was done in Alexandria around 250 BC, uses the word Ecclesiastes, and it's derived from the word ecclesia. What's the word ecclesia? Ecclesial, ecclesiastic. You get the idea? It's from an assembly or a congregation or a church, and it means preacher, so it's about the same thing. And then the Latin does the same thing, Ecclesiastes, a speaker before an assembly. So what is he communicating? What is he preaching? What is this message he's got, this burden that he's got, an oracle that he wants to convey, and it comes out of hard-earned wisdom that he wants to convey this. I take it that it's Solomon for several reasons. Powerful arguments. First is the external, then the internal evidence. The external evidence for Solomon is that the Jewish Talmudic tradition attributes it to Solomon. But it suggests that Hezekiah's scribes may have edited the text. Proverbs 25:1 suggests something similar to that in the Proverbs. And then there is also the Christian position, though some scholars, along with the Talmud, believe it was later edited during the time of Hezekiah or possibly Ezra. I think the internal evidence is strong, very strong, because the author, first of all, calls himself the son of David, king in Jerusalem. And he was indeed the wisest man who ever taught in Jerusalem. And the descriptions of Koheleth's exploration of pleasure and impressive accomplishments and his unparalleled wealth were fulfilled only in King Solomon. No one else is even close. Then there's internal evidence as well that continues that it's similar to the book of Proverbs in many ways, especially chapters 7 and 10. According to chapter 12, verse 9, Koheleth collected and arranged many proverbs, and it may refer to those two collections in Proverbs 7 and 9. At any rate, though, it may include that. But the unity of authorship is supported by references to the 7 references to Koheleth in this book. So the date and setting is intriguing. Just a quick word about this, that the literary forms, you can't use the literary forms because they're unique. You can't use it to set the date. All before this, some people say it can't be Solomon because all who were before me, but there was only David before him. No, there were actually many other kings in Jerusalem before David, and so there was an array of people. Only he fit the evidence, though. And so it was clearly Solomon for a lot of reasons, and he was the only son of David who reigned over Israel from Jerusalem. And it tells us it was probably written late in his life, I think in around 935 BC. Now, there is this idea that there's a tradition, Jewish tradition, that he wrote Song of Solomon in his youth, that he wrote Proverbs in his middle years, but this was the reflection in his late years, as things were beginning to decline as well. And it may be, but we don't know, but it may be expressing his regret for the folly of wasted time due to carnality and idolatry, to which he succumbed. This wisest of men ironically became a fool, and he allowed these foreign wives. He began to serve their gods as well, and so it led to idolatry. This wisest, how is it possible? You just marvel at that. But don't consider let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. Don't think that you're not possible of doing any of these things. No references to historical events older than, other than the personal aspects. So the location we know is Jerusalem, the seat of Israel's rule. And so I'm going to just take you in a quick survey of this. It's profound and problematic. Let me see what my time is. Yeah, have it such that it stays on. I can't use this thing as a clock because when I use it in this format. Oh, I've got this now. Now I've got 3 watches coming up. Thank you. Sometimes the analog's better. Yeah, but because I'm using this for one purpose, and then I'm not able to see. Because I have to work backwards from the remaining time. Time is truncated, which is the whole point of this book. How much time you got? Less than you think. It's wise for you to recognize that. Do not presume on the future. That's part of the whole point of this book is the idea. Remember, you're going to have your life is short, and you'd better live it wisely because there is an outcome that's going to take place. It's an intense search, though, and it's inquiries and it looks at the absurdities of life as well. The greatest. And it takes the perspective of the greatest answers that wisdom under the sun, remember from a non-Archimedean, from under the sun on a road perspective can provide. But then he looks beyond that and sees the sun from time to time. So there's a complex dialogue looking at what would we conclude if we didn't have the light, that light. If the preacher is identified as Solomon, as I think he is, Koheleth was written from he wrote his work from a unique vantage point because he possessed the greatest his mental capacity was vast, apparently. And his material capacity, his political resources, ever combined in one man. This reminds me of something, though, that I cannot help but mention. And it has to do with Deuteronomy chapter 17. And it was an exhortation given to Moses about 400 years before they would anoint any king, because we'd have the period of the judges. And he said, when you anoint a king, and you will, 400 years before, here's the one you should appoint. And it needs to be from your own countrymen. And this must be one who does not multiply horses. He must not multiply wives. And third, he must not multiply silver or gold. You see, they correspond to power, sex, and money. And so these things were things, and to multiply them is to tether your heart to them. It becomes your possessions define you, as happens today so clearly. We may not be as worshiping brazen and bronze altars and so forth, but we still have our idols. And so it'd be foolish to think of it. Instead, what were they to do? And all the kings did to some degree, but he did it in vast excess. 300 wives and 700 porcupines. Yeah. What do you need? And that's, What's the difference? James says, "What's the difference between a wife and a porcupine?" I will not comment on that. Anyway, it turns out, though, just some things came to my mind I better not say. Yeah. But instead, they were all commanded, here's what you ought to do. Three things you must not do, and here's the two things you must do. Here's the interesting thing. You look at the kings of Judah. Guess what? None of them did the things they were supposed to do. But they all did the things they weren't supposed to do, with few exceptions. And so they multiplied all these things. Instead, you were to be, but let him be a man of the word. Notice, he is to write a copy of the law of Moses, write out in his own handwriting, and to do it in front of the Levitical priest. So he was a man of the word, and he was a man of authority. And he would take his own handwritten copy, and he would study it every day so that he would learn humility and realize that wisdom comes by humility, not by arrogance, you see. And so he was to do this, and he would be a man under authority. How many people did it? Good idea, wasn't it? Nah. So it was totally ignored, and Solomon, it was in spades. And so we continue on, though, to recognize this whole qualified author to do this. Let me jump ahead here. I'll just do this. I'll say a few things about this. Do it, just the first few books. I have enough time. So the thesis, the approach. There are many approaches to take to outlining this book, but essentially it's hard to synthesize. Of those alternative approaches, the one I'm using is first of all, the thesis that all is vanity, of emptiness, futility, evanescence. This doesn't seem to make any sense. It all seems to be vanity, and the declaration of that in chapter 1, verses 1 to 11. And then the proof that all is vanity in 1:15 through chapter 6. And then the counsel for living with vanity is to fear God at the end in chapter 7 through 12. So the thesis that all is vanity is found in 1 to 11. So after a one-verse introduction, the preacher begins with his theme. So we go to Ecclesiastes 1, and you see the words of the preacher of Koheleth, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Haval Havalim, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What advantage does a man have in all his work which he does under the sun? So essentially he says, life under the sun seems to be futile, seems to be perplexing. And then verses 3 to 11 illustrate this theme by talking about the apparently endless and meaningless cycles found in nature and in history. The cycles of birth, growth, decay, and death of civilizations, of anything that you see. So he says, what advantage does he have? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Also the sun rises. So the King James, the sun also rises, is where Hemingway got his novel, you see, from that. So the sun also rises, and the sun sets, and hastening to its place, it rises there again. It's the same process, you see, blowing toward the south and then turning toward the north. The wind continues swirling along on its circular courses. The wind returns. All the rivers, he's got the hydrologic cycle very well down, you see, and a lot of the science is good in this, but all the rivers flow into the sea, and yet the sea isn't full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. They evaporate, they go back up, and there's a cycle of movement that takes place. But it's all things that are wearisome. Man's not able to tell it. The eye isn't satisfied with seeing, nor is the ear filled with hearing. That which has been is that which will be, and that which has been done is that which will be done. So there's nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one might say, see, this is new? Already it existed for ages, which were before us. There's no remembrance of earlier things, and also of the later things which will occur. There will be for them no remembrance among those who come later still. It just seems to be futile, evanescent, and meaningless. And so you look at that question of that. There's a sense in which, for the first time, we might say there is something new, and that has to do with new forms of technology that didn't exist before. And we've talked about this on multiple occasions, but the idea of these technological revolutions, where you look at the human history of man, and it was a flat line, basically, for a long time. I'm moving it upside down so you can see I'm moving along. So it was a long time. I could stretch it out until all of human history, until the agricultural, industrial, and let me go do it this way, better to do it. Until the 17th century is a flat line. Nothing new. Something then began to happen. There was the agricultural revolution in the 17th century that made another revolution possible, which was the Industrial Revolution. It began to change our whole approach to time and to work and to everything else, the age of the machine. And then the Electrical Revolution. So by the end of the 19th century, they were beginning to install the light bulbs, replacing the other forms of light. And then that grew and grew. And then the nuclear revolution in the early and late 20th century is a very radical change. What's happening, by the way, above you? Notice the graph is growing up for the first time. But it's really going to spike up very soon. Because after the nuclear, you have the digital. And this is something new of which you can say it has not been seen before. But it's the first time in history where you could say that. Then the digital revolution, I then say, I call it the quantum. The quantum, the 21st century. And look at the curve. It's going up exponentially. And here, I get my guy back. But I also think the AI, quantum computing, and fusion power, radical game changers in ways we can't even begin to imagine, but it really is the tower, it's the technology of the second Tower of Babel, what you're seeing, but that's another discussion there. So I go off from this because for the first time there's a sense in which we could say there is something new under the sun. But it's not a good thing what's under the sun, because you can see it's taking people away from the analog realm of reality and bringing them into a world in which they've created themselves, a digital technology tower, which everything's connected together. So just as the Tower of Babel had one language, so the one language of technology and technocracy and all that implies. Who will control the controller? Fewer and fewer controllers holding on to more and more people. It's the abolition of man writ large by C.S. Lewis. If you haven't read that book, it's well worth a look, because it was prescient and he anticipated what we're seeing very clearly today. He even did a fictional version of the abolition of man, That Hideous Strength. And it's a very powerful image of our own technology. So he was right on the money. So what's happening is people being seduced into this other realm. But I better stop waxing on that. Move back to my little thing. We digress. Chapter 4, 1:4 to 1:11, and it brings us into this this whole understanding. And then 1:12 to 2:26 gives us another perspective as well. So that what you have is the preacher describes his multiple quests for meaning and satisfaction. And he explores his vast personal resources. So he begins with wisdom in 1:12 to 1:18. To 18, and finds that he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. And so he realizes that, so let me read it. So it's 1:12 to 18. And so he says, I sought wisdom. I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom. Then he would look at works. He would look at wealth. He would look at women. He would look at wine. He would look at wit. And a lot of W's. And each of them he explored. Now that doesn't work. He tried it all. He was the most extensive explorer of the human capacities that the world had ever known or seen. So he begins with his vast wisdom because he had it. There was no one like him until Christ. You see, he was the greatest. This is why I'm always astonished that he could become a fool. Because wisdom doesn't have to do with just intellect. There's a moral wisdom. It's a different dimension that requires a submission to the purposes of God, and that was a complex thing. So he goes on to say, I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. It is a grievous task to which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. I've seen all the works which have been done under the sun. There's that phrase, under the sun. And behold, all is vanity and striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, behold, I have magnified and increased wisdom more than all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my mind has observed a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. I set my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I realized that this also is striving after wind. dust in the wind. Because in much wisdom there is much grief. Increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. The greater awareness that you have makes you more able to perceive the pain of this fallen world. Because if you do not have a fourth act coming, we're living in a tragedy. It's birth, growth, decay, death. In that kind, but instead of death, it's going to be life. So there has to be the birth, the growth, decay, but then instead of the death, followed by life, resurrected life. So I set my mind to know this. Much wisdom, there's much grief, and increasing knowledge results in pain. And so Koheleth goes from there, and then in verse the next verse he begins to describe how he pursues laughter, hedonism, and wine in 2:1-3, and then works, women, and wealth in 4-11. And this leads to emptiness as well. So we go to this, let me see about chapter 2, where I need to go to the next chapter. So I said, I'll test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. And it too was vanity. I said, of laughter, it's madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? So we tried wit and wealth and women and all these other things, how to stimulate my body with wine while my mind was guiding me wisely, how to take hold of folly until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under the heaven, under the few years of their life. He tried hedonism. This man, whatever he tried, he went beyond the norm, you see. So you can't say he didn't try. And he said, that didn't do any good. And so I couldn't see, until I could see what good there is, I enlarged my works. So he tries his works, his accomplishments. So how many men define themselves by their accomplishments? Especially men who are driven out of their insecurity to accomplish great things, to prove to a father that they will amount to something. Often it's out of our greatest deficiencies that we create our greatest things, because it's to prove I will matter. My life does count. And so to do that, but it's again striving after the win and futility, because someone else will have what you have and you know it. So that cannot be the answer, as he'll go on to say. I enlarged my work. I built houses, vineyards. I made gardens and parks for myself. I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. Imagine the extraordinary, he was a naturalist, and so the beauty must have been splendid. He says, I made ponds of water for myself from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves. I had homeborn slaves, possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. Also, I collected for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers and the pleasure of men, many concubines. He had many. Then I became great. So he tried all this, more than all. All my eyes desired, I didn't refuse them. I didn't withhold my heart from any pleasure. My heart was pleased because of my labor, and this is my reward. And then I consider all my activities. And what does it add up to? Striving after the wind. There's no profit under the sun. So many people will say, they're climbing up the ladder of success to get one rung higher, stepping on people's hands, sometimes heads, to get another rung higher, only to discover to their horror at the end of their journey that the ladder was perched against the wrong wall. And they were pursuing all these things in vanity, and it led to nowhere. And so it will be, and that's what he describes. So he turned to consider wisdom, and I won't go into all this, but he speaks about wisdom, and it really didn't matter, because at the end of the day, the fool and the wise man both seem to go to the same place. There's no lasting remembrance of the wise or the fool. So I hated life because of the work which had been done me. He talks about labor, and he has mixed signals, because he hates it, but yet on the other hand, it provides some meaning to men. I hated the fruit of my labor for which I labored under the sun. I must leave it to the man who will come after me. Who knows whether he'll be a wise man or a fool? All your labor is given to another. And how many times has intergenerational wealth declined because of excess and folly, because of self-indulgence and so forth? There's no assurance that what you've amassed will be properly stewarded beyond even maybe one generation is a rarity. There are some cases where great wealth has been and it's been done with integrity. I think I can think of some companies, but they're unusual. But rarely will it last beyond a second generation. if the third generation begins to diminish and there's a mission drift and all of that. What was that all about? Did I accumulate it to give it to fools? And so he says, what does a man get in his labor and his striving, which he labors under the sun? He says, this even at night, it's painful and grievous, because how many people have, when they go to sleep, they're wrestling with deals and problems and worries and fears that can keep them totally occupied, so they don't even have any rest in their soul. So he considers, it seems that's from the hand of God. Who can eat? But so he says, there's nothing better to do, though. He goes the other side, than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. Because he goes on to say that at least there's some product and there can be joy. He's given the task of gathering, collecting. So he may give to one who is good in God's sight. This too is vanity, though, and striving after wind is good and bad, because they're going to give it to the wrong person. Then the next chapter, and I'm out of time, I'm afraid. We'll get to that next time, two times from now. But this is the well-known part, and I'll just leave you with this. And of course, I remember growing up with the birds. Turn, there is a season, and so forth. And I can't read this now without hearing that. I'm sorry, but that's a time to do this, a time to search, and a time to tear apart, a time to love, and a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. And what do you say? I pray it won't be too late, but you're missing the point. The idea here is that there is this theme that appropriate times, but here's where I want to leave you. He has made everything appropriate in its time. He's also set eternity in their heart, yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. You are a person who is a bearer of the Imago Dei. He's planted eternity in your heart. This verse is powerful. Even the non-believer then has this interior grasp that there's got to be more. Even though they reject it, eternity's in their heart. And so this longing then for an answer, for satisfaction, is hardwired, because you and I were meant for not the finite. You and I were meant for an eternal destiny. The trans-finite, trans-temporal is your true end. Nothing less than that is big enough for you to long for. I'll let Parker close this with his question. You use the mic for the Zoomers. Turn on the mic. You don't ever stand at that lectern. I was sweared he had I'm sorry, that's the lectern. Oh, you were... Vanity, Haval Havalim. It's all gone. And wish he's gone. Anyway, we'll pick it up in a couple of weeks. I did my best. I've done my best, but we were a little bit late. Yeah. Thank you.